So if I'm writing management accounting, how do I optimize myself to be able to pass the examination? Because there is a lot that I need to go through in management accounting. If you're writing management accounting, there is a lot you need to go through. But how do you optimize yourself so that you can increase the chances of passing the examination? And that is the first thing I want us to look at. So 90% of the syllabus, what are the things you have to focus on? The first thing you need to understand is that a subject like management accounting, there are some fundamental principles that you need to understand. Whether you like it or not, as far as you are walking into the examination for the management accounting, you need to understand cost classification. This is a fundamental principle. Now, this is where we classify costs according to their nature. So we have the elements of cost, which is material cost, labor cost, and overheads. Then we're going to be classifying costs according to their behavior. Very important as well. But this is where we have fixed cost, variable cost, semi-variable, and semi-fixed cost. Then you need to find out, okay, how do we split total cost into fixed and variable cost? That means we have to use the high and low method. So fundamentally, if you are going into the exam hall for management accounting, you have to understand cost classification. Under that topic of cost classification also, you are able to learn about the cost sheet or the cost card preparation, where we bring the direct material cost, direct labor cost, direct expenses. The summation of all direct costs gives us the prime cost, and then you can add your factory overheads, so you get a factory or production cost. After that, we can then add non-production overheads, then we get a total cost of the product. After we get a total cost of the product, we then go ahead to add our factory margin or our margin or markup, so we can get a selling price or the quoted price. So as a management accounting student walking into the exam hall, the first thing that you have to understand, the first thing fundamentally is cost classification, because there is a lot of discussion there. Then we come to the issue in respect of accounting for overhead. Very important. And so this is where we are going to be looking at how we allocate overheads, how we apportion the overheads, because when it comes to overhead apportionment, this is where we look at the preparation of the overhead analysis sheet. So you have to know how you will prepare the overhead analysis sheet and the basis of apportionment of various overhead items. So if we are looking at something like canteen cost as an overhead, how do we apportion canteen cost? We can use the number of employees in each cost center or each department, or we can use the number of meals served to each department. How do we apportion insurance of the building? We can use the floor area occupied. How do we apportion rent? We can use again the floor area occupied. How do we apportion electricity bills to the various departments of the organization? We can use the meter reading for each of the departments, or better still, sometimes weird though, but we can still use the floor area occupied. And so overhead allocation, how we charge overheads to a particular cost center or cost unit. Then overhead apportionment, that is how we are sharing overheads among cost centers and cost units within the organization using a fair basis of apportionment. So that is very important, because you can have a 10 marks question where the examiner is asking you to prepare the overhead analysis sheet. So you have to know how to prepare the overhead analysis sheet. Now, at the end of the period, what is going to be happening is that the service department exists to serve the production department or the main department of the organization. So it is possible for us to reapportion the service cost to the various departments, and that is called reapportionment of overheads. So under accounting for overheads, these are all fundamentals. Okay? And if your fundamentals are weak, when you get to the exam, you're going to screw yourself up. All right? Not the one when your fundamentals are weak, the one exchange rate will expose you. Nah, that's not what we're talking about here. But if your fundamentals are weak, ICA will expose you, because you're going to see the questions and you're going to screw it up generally, right? Which you don't want to screw up. And so under the accounting for overhead, overhead allocation, overhead apportionment. Then we go to the third one, that is overhead absorption. And so this is where one fundamental principle comes to town, and that is absorption costing, where we are going to be calculating the overhead absorption rate and absorb the overhead using various bases of absorption. Okay, and so this is very important. So absorption costing. But there is a limitation on the absorption costing. What is the limitation? Using the absorption costing, what happens is that it's like a generalized factory-wide overhead absorption rate that is applied to all the cost centers and cost units. And so to accurately determine the overhead that each of the departments or cost centers have incurred, an alternative school of thought will be used, which is activity-based costing, ABC. So under activity-based costing, what we are doing is, yes, we are still apportioning the overheads, but we are now doing it based on the activities that each of the departments or cost centers have actually undertaken. So under activity-based costing, you're going to be identifying the cost pool. Then you come to the cost drivers. Okay, the cost pool are the major activities. The cost drivers are the activities which causes the cost. So if we take a hospital, for instance, what are the major activities of the hospital? Maybe surgery, maybe administration, maybe nursing, because when people are admitted, they will be nursed. I mean, their bed will be changed, they will be looked after, and all of those things. Those will be major activities. If it is a manufacturing company, then the major activities are going to be issues in relation to ordering of inventories, production setup, dispatching of orders, and all of these things. So activity-based costing, you'd identify the cost pool, identify the cost drivers, then you calculate the overhead absorption rate, then you allocate the overheads. Once you allocate the overheads, you'll be able to now calculate the total overheads for each of the cost centers or cost units within the organization. And so that is activity-based costing, right? So activity-based costing is opposite of absorption costing. But in between these guys is the marginal costing principle, which says that we are focusing on contribution. And so under that, contribution is selling price minus variable cost, and profit is going to be contribution minus fixed cost. But under the absorption costing, if we are preparing the profit statement, we are going to be interested in the gross profit. So it's going to be sales minus cost of sales to give us gross profit. Then with less non-production overheads, boom, we are able to get the net profit in that case. So these are fundamentals. So before you tell yourself, oh, I'm starting to study management accounting. Oh, I'm looking at this. Oh, I'm walking into the management accounting examination. You have to understand everything under cost classification. You have to understand everything under accounting for overheads. But most importantly is marginal costing principle, absorption costing principles, activity-based costing principles. Then you have to understand the principle of high and low, because high and low method has to do with how we're going to be splitting total cost into the fixed and variable. And that principle is applicable throughout the syllabus under various topics. So that is our fundamentals. Once you are okay with these fundamentals, management accounting becomes easy. Why? Because from there, we go to a major topical area of the syllabus, and that is short-term decisions. There's a 20-mark question. If the examiner doesn't get excited, then 15-mark question in the exam hall waiting for you on short-term decisions. And there are a lot of short-term decisions you have to know about. Limiting factor analysis, where the entity is having less inputs or resources than it requires. So how can the entity use the less resources to optimize its profit? Limiting factor analysis. Throughput accounting, it's also in that picture. Then we'll talk about relevant costing analysis or relevant cost analysis. What does that mean? If we receive a one-off contract or a special order, how do we determine the cost of that one-off contract or that special order? We use relevant costing principle. Okay, the entity is thinking about making product in-house or buying them from outside. Okay, how do they make that decision? That is make or buy. We are going to be looking at that. Okay, there is a department or a product line of the company that is making losses, and so the entity is contemplating whether to continue to maintain that product line or shut it down, and so that leads us to shut down decision. Then we will look at break-even analysis as well. So under short-term decisions, there are a lot of things there. Limiting factor analysis, make or buy, shutdown, break-even analysis, relevant cost analysis. All of these, you can do them well if you understand the marginal costing principle, which means you are going to be only considering the relevant cost, and we are going to be using the marginal costing principle. And so short-term decisions, and each of these short-term decisions have their own principles. But if you understand the marginal costing principle well, and understand that I am focusing on contribution, I understand that you are going to be looking at the relevant cost of making the decision, boom, you'll be able to excel in the short-term decisions. Then budgeting and budgetary control. There's a question waiting for you under budgeting. Either you're going to be preparing the functional budget, which is the budget for each of the departments of the organization, or the master budget, which is the cash budget, budgeted income statement, and budgeted statement of financial position. So it depends on how excited the examiner is, but that is budgeting. Then you come to the issue in respect of variance analysis, standard costing and variance analysis. So we have the basic variances and then the advanced variances. You have to know about all of those things. But this is it. When you get to variance analysis, calculation of the factory, the overhead variance, and then the sales quantity variance, you would have to be mindful of the marginal costing and absorption costing principle, which I mentioned earlier as your foundation. Because if you forget the environment that the organization is in, then you may calculate fixed overhead variances or variable overhead variances wrongly based on the environment that the entity is operating within. That is very important. Are you getting it? So variance analysis, crucial. Then you come to investment appraisal. As per the current syllabus, this is the final examination date. So there is investment appraisal. In the new syllabus, there is no investment appraisal, but there is investment appraisal here. 10 marks question or 15 mark question waiting for you in the exam hall under investment appraisal. Then under investment appraisal also, you are going to be applying the marginal costing principle, where you are looking at the relevant cost of undertaking the project. So if you pay attention closely, if you understand the marginal costing principle, it helps you in short-term decisions, 20 marks. It helps you in variance analysis, 10 to 15 marks. It helps you in investment appraisal, 10 to 15 marks. Are you seeing it? Then we go to the final part, which is question 1, and that is going to be performance measurement. And that area also, there are a lot of things that we can talk about there. Transfer pricing is there. Divisionalized performance evaluation for each division, where we are using the ROI, return on investment, and RI, residual income, is also there. But when you are making the decision on transfer pricing, the marginal costing principle will chase you there. And so if you realize this is the syllabus, but there are a lot of theories also in management accounting. A lot of theories. Your exam is actually going to be 35-65 on the average, meaning 35% of the questions will be comment or theory questions, while 65 will be calculation questions. So it means that under each of the subject topics listed, there are theories in there. And so the way you optimize yourself is know the theories under each of the topics. Then when you get to the exam hall, you have to take out all the theories first, even before you get excited in the calculation areas. So management accounting, that's how you're going to be approaching it. So if I know about 30 or 35% of the questions are going to be on theory, you got to read the theories, right? 35%. If you get 20 of that, you do a little calculation, boom, you should be able to pass the examination at the end of the day. That is the idea about management accounting. So if you're writing management accounting, that's the strategy. Know the fundamental principles. Understand how the fundamental principles connect to each of the topical issues in the syllabus. But number 3, about 35% of the questions in the exam hall will be written or comment questions. So pay attention to all the theories under each of the topics that we have listed, because 30 to 35% of your questions will be the theories under these topics. So one thing that I see students do in management accounting is they spend the time doing calculations and ignoring the theory. Or they are like, oh, Nhyira, when I read a theory, I will forget. So I am waiting the 3 days to the exam, or maybe the night before the exam, I will read, then it will be fresh in my head. No. Chances are, when the exam is getting closer, you are likely to be nervous and you will be doing the calculation aspect, ignoring the theory part. And so you have to consciously study the theories and the calculations as you go. Consciously study the theories and the calculations as you go. And that is how you position yourself to pass the management accounting examination. Know the fundamental principles. Know how they connect to each of the topics in the syllabus. Number 3, understand that there is going to be 35% of your questions, or 30% of the questions written or comment. So read all the theories and study alongside like that. So you do some calculations, read the theories. You do some calculations, read the theories. You do some calculations, read the theories. Then my final takeaway on management accounting is everything is about principles. So you have to know the principles. I cannot say anything other than the principles. Because when we come to relevant cost analysis, there are principles. When it comes to make or buy, there are principles. When it comes to break-even analysis, there are principles. When it comes to throughput accounting ratios, there are principles. When it comes to limiting factor analysis, there are principles. So you have to understand the principles pretty well, because in the exam hall, you're going to be applying principles. And the last thing is English language. Management accounting, if you don't understand English, you're going to get zokbo. English language is very important, because now when I say English language, I'm not talking about what you speak at work, what you speak with your children at home, or what you speak with your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever the heck. I'm talking about your level of comprehension of management accounting terminologies and languages. So if the examiner says, oh, an entity buys inventory, but the inventory is not in constant use, however, the entity will not use this inventory for anything else, but can sell the inventory for this amount of money, then what is the relevant cost of that inventory? Principle. So you have to follow the English and understand this is what the examiner is trying to talk about. So English language is crucial here when we talk about management accounting. And I want you to really be mindful of this.